Yo, what's going on everybody, it's Freaky99 and welcome back to another Destiny 2 The Final Shape Endgame build video. This time I have a deadly Titan build for you that utilizes the full power of Prismatic to just make Khvostov go absolutely crazy. We have so much actual just add clear and damage, and then when we get into actual orb generation, I'm finishing missions with near double the amount of orbs generated than all of my teammates, which means we're getting our supers back super quickly. We're actually getting our Eyes Up Guardian perk activated on our Khvostov, and everything is just working so beautifully with this build. It's something I've been able to take into Grandmaster Nightfalls and any expert or master level content, and it just does wonders. So of course, with all my builds, there's going to be a picture at the end of the video along with a dim link in the description for easy copying. Without further ado, let's jump into the build. Now, starting off with the subclass, of course we have Prismatic, and for our super, I've been going Hammer of Soul, because one, it is a pretty good solar super to allow yourself to have enough damage when you're getting into endgame content, and be able to actually have a super that goes off from a distance, but two, since it is a solar super, it also synergizes with Facet of Purpose, which makes it so whenever we pick up an Orb of Power, we're granting ourselves Restoration. Now, Restoration is of course fantastic in endgame content. Having consistent healing is always really nice, but there's many cases where, of course, if you find you are not requiring Restoration, you can switch off your super over to something like Twilight Arsenal or Blade Fury or Thunder Crash. I've been really able to actually experiment with the supers I want to use, and even in something like a Grandmaster Nightfall, I was using Twilight Arsenal despite it only giving you Void Overshield whenever you pick up an Orb of Power. And of course, this all depends on your own skill level. If you're finding you're having trouble, just use Hammer of Soul for that restoration. But if you are finding that you're able to play this build correctly and be able to actually survive in that endgame content despite it being dicey, then do switch over to Twilight Arsenal, as its damage is just fantastic, especially in Grandmaster Nightfalls, because this thing can just nuke down champions. Now next, for our barricade, I'm grabbing Rally Barricade, as it is fantastic. It grants us increased weapon reload speed, stability, and range when we stand behind it, and all of our allies get those buffs as well. It's also on a very low cooldown, which is what we're looking for, as we are rocking Reaper in order to generate more orbs of power. Thruster is nice, and in many content like expert level content, you could actually use Thruster, but once you actually get into Grandmaster content, do use the Rally Barricade, as that just bit of extra protection is really nice to have. Moving forward, we're grabbing our melee, which is Frenzied Blade. Frenzied Blade is a fantastic melee. It does a great amount of damage. It severs targets, which lowers their damage output, and then plus it gives us 3 melee charges, which is fantastic as it synergizes with Consecration. Consecration makes it so whenever we slide while we're sprinting, we do a slide and we can activate our melee to launch ourselves in the air, send out a solar wave that scorches enemies, and then if we activate our melee again while in the air, we slam down, send out another wave, and if that wave hits anything that is scorched, it immediately ignites them. Now, I have played around with some of the aspects here. I've played around with Diamond Lance, Unbreakable, and even Knockout, but I have found for this build that Consecration does work the best. Knockout, there's many cases when you are in Grandmaster Nightfalls and trying to go for those punches will only end up with you going down. Using Unbreakable is nice, but it requires you to sacrifice your grenade, which can be a really big bonus to us and our actual ability loop. And then Diamond Lance doesn't get enough effect. You need to actually have an ability to actually take down enemies to spawn Diamond Lances enough, and with this build we just don't have that ability. So having Consecration gives us a very powerful melee. It allows us to not really use Frenzied Blade and instead just have this massive damage with ignitions. But of course, if you are in a panic situation, Frenzied Blade can go off, sever your target, and you can get away or finish off what you are going down. Next up, we are also using Suppressor Grenade. Now, Suppressor Grenade is an interesting choice here. One, you do have to get a little bit used to actually using it, as it can actually suppress and damage you, and it also is a bouncing grenade, which means that it actually needs to hit a surface first, and then once it bounces off a surface, then it will actually explode. It actually suppresses overload champions, allowing us to play a little bit more safely. With this build, we actually do have a little bit more trouble with stunning overload champions just with our weapon setups and how our abilities are. We don't have issues with unstoppables because of consecration, and we don't have issues with barriers because of all the orbs we are generating to get radiant orbs. So having overload as our only problem here means that suppressor grenade is really nice when we don't have transcendent. And then going on to our second aspect, we are using Drenger's Lash. When we activate our barricade, it's going to send out a ripple that will suspend enemies that it hits. It's really nice to have, especially since it stuns unstoppables. It can suspend barriers or overloads, allowing you to actually get the stun off on them quickly. I've had many situations where I use Drenger's Lash to suspend an overload champion so I can pull out my sword and actually go in for the stun on them. Now, going on from the aspects, moving down to the fragments, of course we did cover Facet of Purpose, but we are also using Facet of Generosity. Now this makes it so while we defeat targets while transcendent, it creates orbs of power for our allies, and this is absolutely insane because as far as I know, this doesn't really have a cooldown on it, which means alongside a Siphon mod and Reaper mods and a heavy-handed, it means that all the orbs we are spawning when we are transcendent just get absolutely multiplied. And then all of these orbs just generate tons of super energy for our allies. It can give them healing if they're using recuperation. It just means that we're a huge help to whatever team that we're running with. Moving forward from that, we're also using Facet of Hope, so while we have an elemental buff, our class ability regenerates more quickly. We are grabbing Radiant very easily because of the artifact, which is giving us Radiant Orbs, so that's very nice to have. We're also using Facet of Solitude, so rapid precision hits amid a severing blast from the target. We are using Khvostov, which is insanely accurate, meaning that we can actually get the sever blasts off very consistently. And for most cases, we are also using a sniper rifle now, which again, it can get those severing blasts off even quicker because it needs less shots too. We're also using Facet of Protection, which while surrounded by combatants, we are more resistant to incoming damage, and this effect gets increased while we are transcendent. It is a huge help, especially in endgame content, to just have all these different damage resistance stacking on top of each other. And then plus we also get transcendence very quickly with this build because we are using Facet of Grace. Defeating targets with kinetic weapons grants us bonus transcendent energy, and defeating targets with our super grants you and your nearby allies bonus transcendent energy. This means that we are just a huge boon to our allies because we are getting all this super orbs for ourselves, but also all of the kinetic weapon takedowns that we're getting with Khvostov is granting us a huge amount of transcendent energy, allowing us to get our transcendence activated super quickly in just the first couple seconds of an actual encounter. Facet of Grace comes in huge handy with Khvostov, and paired with Facet of Generosity, it means we are absolutely deadly on the battlefield. Now, that is going to do it for the subclass. Moving on to the weapons. Starting out with the weapons, our main exotic of choice is of course going to be the Khvostov exotic auto rifle. Khvostov is back and it's just better than ever with its new intrinsic trait, the right choice, which makes it so every 7th bullet from this weapon deals additional damage and ricochets to a nearby target. This makes it very easy to add clear out enemies, as well as generate orbs and get our siphon procs off because we're getting down multiple enemies with just single target damage. It also has the weapon perk Eyes Up Guardian, which makes it so collecting orbs of power strengthens this weapon's next several ricochet shots, allowing them to bounce between multiple targets. This makes it so our next 7 ricochet shots have a more powerful ricochet to them, allowing us to actually just clear out entire rooms of ads just on our own. With all the orbs of power we are actually generating with this build, it means there's never not a point where we don't have Eyes Up Guardian going, and that means we are just having all these ricochet procs happening, which actually do a lot of damage once everything is going correctly. Khvostov is just a hugely fun gun that I've just had a blast using, and since it came out I've wanted to use it in an actual build, and I think with this build it performs just wonderfully to actually place it into something like endgame content. Despite there being no auto rifle actual seasonal artifact perks, it's still wonderful to use, and you can actually take it into Grandmaster Nightfalls and just shred enemies and ads with it, especially once Eyes Up Guardian actually procs. Moving forward from that, of course, In our energy slot, we want to choose whatever we can stun champions with. For this Grandmaster Nightfall and for anti-barrier champions, I've been of course using a sniper rifle and the brand new sniper rifle Embraced Identity. It can roll rewind rounds and 4th times the charm, allowing it to just have a ton of shots that it can actually shoot. And I've been using it just a ton to actually stun barrier champions, but also just for the damage it can provide, seeing as it has a massive amount of ammo that it can actually preserve for itself with rewind rounds and 4th times the charm. And then of course, moving down to heavy weapons, if you are dealing with overload champions, you want to make sure that you are rocking a sword. Of course, there's a lot of great swords that just came out this season with False Idols and Ill Omen. Ill Omen is a caster frame, allowing you to actually get a long distance stun off, but Ill Omen is a vortex which has a ton of damage to it. Me personally, I've been using Falling Guillotine just because I have a really good roll on it that allows for a massive damage output. Whatever sword you use, you'll be okay, as long as you can just stun that overload champion, so you can go in with some Consecration, some Drenger's Lash, and just finish them off with all your teammates. And then, if you're not using something in overload champions or anything like that, do run a machine gun, and what I would recommend is the Pro Memoria machine gun, which just drops from the Pale Heart destination. It has a lot of really great rolls on it, as well as it has the origin trait Dealer's Choice, which makes it so you actually get even more super generation for yourself. All around, there's a lot of really great auto rifles and machine guns to choose from and pair up with your Actium War Rig, but of course Khvostov is going to be our key piece for this build. Now that's going to do it for the weapons, moving on to the artifact perks. Now, starting out with the artifact perks, in the first column we're grabbing 3 anti-champion mods depending on the weapons that we're using. Of course, with this build we are using a sniper rifle in our energy slot, which we want anti-barrier sniper rifle for, as well as this perk grants overcharge to the weapon type. Overcharge is a 25% damage increase in endgame content like Expert, Master, or Grandmaster content, and you really don't want to miss out on that damage increase as it comes in huge handy, especially for the sniper rifle. In the second column, we're grabbing Overcharged Armory, so Dealer's Choice, Radiolaria Transposer, Collective Purpose, and Sundering Origin traits are always overcharged. Again, a lot of these weapons are really useful, so having this just means we get that 25% damage increase across the board. And then we're also taking Winning Hand, so while using weapons with Dealer's Choice Origin trait, Combatant Precision Final Blows or rapidly defeating combatants cause the target to explode, dealing solar damage to nearby combatants. It's pretty much a pseudo incandescent perk, as well as having several equipped weapons with the Dealer's Choice Origin trait increases the effect of the explosion. Now, Khvostov actually does have Dealer's Choice secretly on it. While it does not benefit from the super regen or from that incandescent as far as I know, it does benefit from having multiple Dealer's Choice Origin trait weapons. So this means if you're using Embraced Identity, that is actually getting an increase, as well as if you use Pro Memoria, then you have 3 Dealer's Choice weapons on, and that just completely goes off. And then in third column, we're grabbing Elemental Siphon, so rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super create an elemental pickup that matches your equipped super. We are also using Overload Sword, of course. This also grants overcharge to the sword, which is that 25% damage increase. Again, you really don't want to miss out on that. And then also we're using Threaded Blast. This is because destroying a tangle with the strand weapon creates a larger, more damaging explosion, and for those cases where we are using Pro Memoria, we want to actually have this active, because tangles do spawn from our Frenzied Blade and from us severing targets. In fourth column, we're grabbing Radiant Orbs, so whenever we pick up an Orb of Power, we're granting ourselves Radiant. Again, very nice to have because it actually grants us Radiant on our Khvostov, which makes it anti-barrier, meaning we don't have to swap over to our sniper rifle all the time, especially that can get dicey in certain situations. And then we are also using Solar Fulmination, which makes it so our ignitions do increased damage in an increased radius. With Consecration, it causes an instant ignition if you get the target marked with the Scorch Line first, and then slam down on them with the other wave. And then in fifth column, we're grabbing Shield Crush, so while we have a Void Overshield with our Void Super, we are getting a melee recharge faster and deal increased damage. This is another incentive to actually use Twilight Arsenal, so you do get those Void Overshields. And then while we are Radiant, we get our Grenade recharging faster and dealing increased damage. And then as well, we are using Transference, so we gain increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent. Very nice to have, but Weapon Final Blows while Transcendent refund light and dark energy after Transcendence ends. This is huge because of course we're using Khvostov, which is our kinetic weapon, and when we are Transcendent, Khvostov is getting that increased damage from Transcendence, and with everything going off, it just means we shred through a amount of enemies, and we get our Transcendence back very quickly. That's going to do it for the artifact perks. Moving on to the armor mods. Starting out with the helmet, we're taking ourselves Dynamo, so when we use our class ability near enemies, we get a reduced super cooldown. Very nice to have because we are actually using our class ability a lot to send out rally barricades and our drinker slash. We're also using kinetic siphon, so rapid kinetic weapon final blows create orbs of power. When this is paired, of course, with Khvostov, this just goes absolutely nuts because in our ricochet bullets, there can even be an amount of time where the ricochet bullets generates multiple orbs just off one shot. And then of course heavy ammo finder, so we are using our primary ammo all of the time with Khvostov, so we're actually generating heavy ammo for ourselves and heavy ammo drops so we can use our sword for overload rounds. Quickly touching on the stat focusing here, firstly we want to focus resilience. Resilience being at 100 gives us a 30% damage resistance, as well as it makes it so our barricade cooldown is reduced. This is really nice to have because again, we want to make sure we're using our barricade lots, but 2, having that 30% damage resistance is huge, especially in Grandmaster Nightfalls, where things can one-shot you when you don't have it. Secondly, we want to focus discipline so we can throw out our grenade as much as possible. Having that suppressor nade to just take down waves of enemies and just suppress them so you can clear out them with your Khvostov is huge, as well as when we go Transcendent, having that actual snare grenade to throw out and use tons is absolutely massive. And again, you want to use your Prismatic grenade as much as possible, so having that discipline at 100 is the next step. And then thirdly, you want to focus your strength because we are using Consecration and Frenzied Blade. Having our strength higher means we can actually use Consecration more, get more ignition procs, and actually just get more consistent damage off. Down to the gauntlets, we are taking Focusing Strike, so when we damage enemies with our powered melee, which is our Consecration or Frenzied Blade, it's going to be granting us some class ability energy back. And then we're also using Bolstering Detonation, which does the same except for our grenade. This means that, of course, when we are doing our ability loop, we're getting more class ability energy back to use our Drinker's Lash and to just get our Reaper mod going. Add to that, we are also using heavy-handed, so our powered melee final blows are creating orbs of power. This is why we are using Consecration, is because it can actually consistently get powered melee final blows, which nothing else really can in endgame content. Down to our chest piece, we have the exotic Actium War Rig with the intrinsic trait auto-loading link. This makes it so it steadily reloads a portion of your equipped auto rifles or machine guns magazines from reserves, as well as it provides a moderate benefit to airborne effectiveness stat for the auto rifles and machine guns. Now, this makes it so Khvostov can nearly fire indefinitely, with you only having to reload it a couple of times, and depending on your ability flow and how much you're using Consecration, there's cases where you just never reload this thing, and your ricochet bullets are constantly flying. This also makes it so if you're using something like Pro Memoria, you can just fire so long and forever that enemies just go quickly down, you get the incandescent going off from your wildcard origin trait, and then everything is just going off beautifully because you're spawning tons of orbs of power from kinetic siphon because you're never reloading Khvostov and just getting tons of takedowns, and then plus you're spawning tons of orbs of power because you're getting Transcendent, you're using your Khvostov, and all of those takedowns are getting orbs of power as well. Any point where you are reloading is wasted time when your Transcendent is up, and it only lasts for so long, so having something like this just means Khvostov goes even more crazy than it already does. Now touching on the actual armor mods, of course we want to rock double resistance to whatever the current threat modifier is. This means if the activity you're going into has an arc threat on it, you want to grab a double arc resistance to match that, and then a third elemental resistance to cover whatever damage type you feel you have the most trouble with after that. If you feel you suffer with Shriekers or Ogres, then slap on a Void resistance. If you feel you have a struggle with incendiary grenades from Hive, or just snipers from Shanks and stuff like that, then go Solar resistance or Arc resistance. Again, it depends on your own personal playstyle, but if you're using something for the Grandmaster Nightfall Fallen Saber, I would use double arc resistance to match the arc threat, and then a solar resistance because there is a lot of solar damage in that from shrapnel launchers and the sniper at the very end of the boss. Down to our leg armor, we're grabbing double kinetic weapon surge for a 17% damage increase to our kinetic weapons while we have an armor charge. This is really nice to have because it means Khvostov performs even better in endgame content, which again, once you get into Grandmaster content, primary weapons can slow down a little bit, but having this double weapon surge plus everything going with Prismatic and Transcendence, it means that Khvostov absolutely slays. And then once you get those first orbs of power collected and you get Eyes Up Guardian going, having kinetic weapon surge on those ricochet bullets just means absolutely wonders for you and your team. You're just generating tons of orbs, you're picking them all up, which means you always have armor charges and you always have these damage increases. And then of course we have recuperation, so whenever we pick up an orb of power, we're replenishing some of our health along with it. And again, all of the orbs respawning, this comes in huge handy because it means we can dive into the middle of enemy fire, pick up orbs, get our ricochets going, and not even know what's going on but still survive. And down to the class item, we're grabbing bombers, so whenever we use our class ability, we're getting some grenade energy back. We're using powerful attraction, so whenever we use our class ability, we're collecting nearby orbs of power. And we're using Reaper, so whenever we use our class ability, we spawn an orb of power on our next weapon final blow. Now, these three together are absolutely wonderful because again, we're using our class ability all the time. Powerful attraction is really nice to have because it means that we actually collect orbs of power that we might not pick up, and it means that when we are actually in critical health, we can use our barricade to pick up orbs of power and get that recuperation healing to actually survive longer. And then for Reaper, it means that we're actually spawning orbs of power. We can spawn an orb of power on the first enemy we take down and the second enemy we take down, with Reaper and Kinetic Siphon both proccing. We are using our class ability all the time with this build, so having Reaper on just means those extra bit of orbs that really come in handy. And that is going to do it for the build. Now, this build has honestly been so much fun. As soon as I got Khvostov, I knew I wanted to use it in a build, and while I did have a lot of fun using it with my Solar Warlock build from last week, it is a lot of fun using it with Actium War Rig and just never having to reload. And then having all of these mods on, having Orbit Generosity, having this playstyle figured out with this build just means that you can sit back, pop your barricade down, suspend your enemies, and just fire away with Khvostov. Anytime you need to get an orb of power, you can go in with your concentration, detonate more enemies, generate more orbs, pick those up, and come back to your barricade for another Drenger's Lash and just get those ricochet bullets going. Once you get into the flow of this build, it absolutely pops off, and I've been in so much pieces of content where I am just stealing all of the enemy takedowns. There are some points where I'm even in Grandmaster difficulty, and I'm ending the content with more kills than both of my teammates combined, just because of Khvostov's ricochet bullets going off. Now, what I will say is that as much as this build is an absolute demon, it isn't the one and best for Grandmaster Nightfalls. There is a certain struggle area when it comes to actual damage, just pure raw instant damage, so of course you do need some help from your allies when you're trying to take down an Overload champion on your own. But once you step into something like expert or master level content, you just absolutely slay down with your ricochet bullets, with your sniper rifle, and with your sword. But then again, that's not to say that this doesn't perform well in Grandmaster Nightfalls, it just means that you have to play a little bit differently because you don't have that pure punching that hunters or just like the Synthoceps build have. You have more of a sit back build where you go in with concentration and come back out with your ricochet bullets, and you just keep that flow going with your suspending, your transcendent, and all of that action going. And of course, with all my build videos, there's going to be a picture on screen for easy copying, as well as a dim link in the description. And of course, be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, as well as hit a subscribe if you want to see future content from me. And if you tried out this build or you have something to say, just leave a comment as I try and respond to all the comments I can, and I love hearing what you guys use with these builds, what you try out with them, or if you found something that might even work even better. It's just really fun to see the community you are all building down there, and I'm just so happy to be able to take part of it and just kind of host that kind of comment section. So thank you everybody so much for watching. I've been FreakyDude99, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace out.